Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Hope everyone had a fabulous weekend. Just wanted to get to everyone a little bit of info for next week and some reviews, some concepts from week 5 as well. Incredibly difficult to believe that it's week 6 of our term, and the term will be over before we know it. So just another reminder, please make sure that you get registered for your courses for next term if you haven't already, assuming that you have courses to take in the summer and fall. We are seeing some courses start, some HSA courses start to fill up for the fall. So if you are impacted by this, be sure that you get that taken care of. So, and one quick plug for the students. I know we have some from the RN to BSN program. If you wanted to pick up a minor in health service administration, I'm not sure how many electives you have available to you in that program, but we do offer the minor in health service administration available online. So, so if that's something that you are interested in doing, it might be a nice addition to your resume moving forward if you're interested in getting involved in the managerial sector if you're not already. So last week we talked about price setting, charge setting, and the various mechanisms, kind of iterations that the industry has gone through over time to get to where we are now. And where we are now is really in a state of flux because we're making this shift to value-based healthcare, yet we really haven't fully embraced that shift yet. There are many in the industry that are still working on that move toward value-based care overall. So we're really kind of in a stuck in a sandwich between fee-for-service care, which is how most organizations still receive their reimbursement, and this push toward value-based care, which affects not only the finances of an organization, but the overall quality of care and efficiency of care. So we're trying to move to this more comprehensive system, but just it's such a complex shift that it's going slowly. But I'm hopeful over time that we'll move to value-based healthcare, being truly value-based, meaning that it's not just collecting data for data's sake and submitting it to your payers and maybe getting some extra money for it, but we're really looking to have a value add in our services, offer value added services like patient-centered medical homes, things like that, that'll make for a better care environment for our patients overall. So that's the hope. But we are slowly making our way toward that for the future. I'm looking forward to seeing your PowerPoints. I won't provide commentary here, but this this particular assignment is a good example of how we did things for so long in a certain way, and now we're kind of trying to make that shift. And some folks that are from the old school of thought don't necessarily understand that. So it makes for a difficult environment sometimes for folks. So I do want to go over a couple of quiz questions. Again, everyone did really well on the quiz, but there were only two questions that were missed overall, so I will go over both of them. The first one was, financial expediency is a method of setting charges on the basis of. There were several answers provided, and the answer was the financial needs of the provider. And when you talk about charge setting via a financial expediency standpoint, it's really about that cost shift. So you guys learned a little more about cost shifting, hopefully for your PowerPoint. It was talked about in the text as well. And I think actually had a video. I think it was last week we had a video. Yeah, it's not in this one. I think it was last week we had a video about cost shifting. So really what financial expediency charge setting was about was really setting our charges, as we had talked a little bit about last week, on that high end, so that we could capture all of the revenue from our private payers. It wasn't necessarily about setting our charges based on our cost, which is really the way we should do things, but it was more about, okay, let's make sure we're capturing the maximum amount of revenue we can from any provider, any patient, any payer that has a commercial insurance. But then, obviously Medicare and Medicaid, they're going to pay what they pay. We have a little more latitude in our negotiations with commercial payers to hopefully get a little bit more money from them. Now we're seeing a shift in that, and that's hence the question that we had from for the PowerPoint assignment this past week is why isn't that effective anymore? Well, it's not effective for a number of reasons, and I won't go into all of them now. Hopefully you captured some of that, and I'll provide you with some comments likely on some of the other things, but generally it's because of this shift to a more prospective payment system, as well as value-based care, where we're not necessarily getting paid based on the fees for service type items that we're doing. We're getting paid on a more bundled payment system across many settings. And even in the physician practice realm, which is where we really do see fee-for-service still alive and well, we're trying to make that shift to a more value-based setting. So financial expediency, a method of setting charges based on the financial needs of the provider is the answer there. Next question and last question. Price-driven costing is the practice of, and the answer was cutting costs to break even with charges. And so price-driven costing came about, we moved into an era, probably the 90s, I think, around there, where we did kind of what was called competition-driven charging. So, so people started to see that if they went to, I'll use my organizations back at home to not implicate any local organization, but if they went to United Health Services Hospital, they would pay a little bit more than when they went to the local faith-based organization, which was Lourdes Hospital. So, so if you went to UHS, you paid a little bit more because that was a time frame when most people's insurance was based on an 80-20 split. So the insurance company paid 80% up to what they said was reasonable and customary, and the patient would pay 20% after their deductible. So what people were seeing was that, overall it costs more to go to United Health Services because their charges are higher, they're getting paid more by their insurers, and they have that 20% that you have to pay as a patient is higher than it would be for the same service at Lourdes. So we saw this competition-driven charging going on. So they would adjust their charge masters based on competition. And what it really is what will the market bear? Similarly to how in areas, and we don't see it as much here because we don't have as much severe weather, but in upstate New York, when it's going to snow, you'll see gas prices go up, you'll see milk prices go up, bread prices go up, and eggs prices go up, corresponding to a major snowstorm coming to the area. So we see a little bit of that here, but I don't think we see the prices going up as to like in upstate New York when we got 3 feet of snow on the way. So but that's that competition-driven pricing. If the market will bear a higher price, they're going to charge a higher price. What this element is, price-driven costing, is where providers were seeing, or organizations were seeing, this competition-driven charging, and so they started adjusting their price adjusting their cost to break even with charges. So so they were lowering their charges all the way to the point where it matched what the cost was, or was very close to what the cost was. So it was a break-even proposition. So let's say it costs an organization, when you take into account overhead, supplies, staff, etc., it may cost an organization $100 to provide a certain service. And prior to this notion, we might charge $300 for that service. But this notion of price-driven costing is where let's say we charge $100 for it and it costs us $100. We're not making money on that service, but hopefully we're going to bring more people into the organization to have other services that might cost a little bit more, or we might charge a little bit more, and therefore we'll make some more revenue. The problem with price-driven costing is that in order to do that, you really have to drive down your costs. So you're looking at re-engineering your organizations, you're looking at cutting staffing, you're looking at adjusting supplies, using the cheapest stuff all the time, things like that, and that can start to impact your quality. So, so price-driven costing was something that was done, and is actually still done somewhat, but it does ultimately impact quality. So you need to have that balance between what's, we're charging an appropriate amount based on the cost, but we also need to be aware of the fact that you can't drive down costs so much that it impacts quality of care in your organization. So price-driven price-driven costing practice of cutting costs so that they break even with charges. So you're not necessarily making a profit or a huge profit on your services. Okay, so let's take a look at week 6. This week we're going to move on and talk about the revenue cycle. So the revenue cycle, if there's anything that you can take away from this course, hopefully you've taken away a few things, but if there is anything that you can take away, understand that management of the revenue cycle is vital for an organization. And it wasn't until I'm going to say probably the mid 90s where we really started looking at revenue cycle from a holistic standpoint. We always had people that worked in different elements of the revenue cycle, but starting in around the mid 90s, we started actually hiring directors of revenue cycle managers to look at the revenue cycle holistically and determine where problems were. So what is the revenue cycle? Revenue cycle is from the birth of an account to the death of an account. It is 0 to 0 balance. So it's everything that impacts that account in between there. So, birth of an account is when the patient calls to schedule an appointment. So scheduling is involved in revenue cycle. Then we have any insurance pre-certifications, those types of things are involved. Then the patient walks in the door, we have front office registration or registration desk at a hospital. Those aspects are part of revenue cycle. Then we move on to the actual clinical services. So making sure clinical charges hit the account properly, making sure we're capturing everything that we're doing on every patient, making sure the documentation is there. That's all part of revenue cycle. Then it moves on to once the patient leaves, we discharge them from that visit or that stay. The revenue cycle continues because now we're looking at medical coding, we're looking at billing the services out, and we're looking at getting payment for that. Then once we get payment, if there's a copay or a deductible or coinsurance that needs to be paid, we need to collect that. Then hopefully at the very end, the account will be back to 0 again. So that's 0 to 0, birth to death of the account. And every little aspect of that, and it's not just the financial aspects. Admissions is a huge element. Scheduling, registration, admissions, that whole function, that's typically where we find problems in the revenue cycle. And then in the clinical realm, especially in the hospital setting, we often find problems with the revenue cycle where we're not capturing everything that we're doing. And then on the back end, we have problems in the revenue cycle when perhaps things aren't being coded properly or we're not getting the bill out in a timely manner. I just read an article from a facility in upstate New York, way upstate, further north of Albany, much further north than where I lived, but where they lost like $1 billion for their facility, and it's not a big facility to begin with, because they weren't getting the bills out the door on time. You only have a certain time frame to bill your insurers, and they weren't getting the bills out the door, so they lost somewhere in the realm of $1 billion over 2 years. So that they need a revenue cycle manager to make sure that stuff's getting out the door. So, and those are just a few examples. There's so much to do with the revenue cycle, certainly an important aspect of what we do. So from a work standpoint, we have our flip grid for this week, but I did want to talk about this assignment, talking about revenue cycle performance. So take a look in your textbook. There's some information about the ways to evaluate revenue cycle performance, but think about what I just talked about as well, and maybe do some research on your own also. What are ways that we can impact the revenue cycle, and how do we evaluate that? There are a couple standard ways, but if you can find some insight from other readings that you do throughout the week, that might provide you some good background other than the things that we've talked about and we'll talk about in class. So that's all I have for this week. If you have any questions, please let me know. Also next week, let me click over here to week 7. Next week, here we go. Our final project is due. So based on the topic you chose back in week 4, you want to be working on that project. So please let me know if you have any questions or problems with that. So look forward to talking with everyone this week, and have a wonderful week.